and then one person wanted to call, but I'm not going to do it that way. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just going to, just to show CYFD that I'm training, you know?
Okay. So I'll tell you a little bit about, so I teach all the classes here. I also do individual counseling, family counseling, couples counseling. I work a lot with people to help them navigate these family dynamics, these court dynamics. I have experienced them myself, so I draw from my own personal experience too, and I'm happy to share that. I'm open with that. I don't mind doing that. I think it's necessary. I think we're all human. And so simply because I have a different role in society doesn't mean that I haven't experienced some of these very same things I have. Mm-hmm. So hopefully what I discuss, reaches people and they feel like they're understood. They feel like there's not any shame in what they're going through. And I look at trends every week. I look at themes. I look at different things that come up that people bring up that tend to be aligned with things that I'm going through as well. So I wrote down some of the topics I'm going to cover in today's class, both parenting and the evening men's class. Why boundaries are so important in safe relationships, because they are. The highest timeline of integrity and the ability to control yourself only. Punishment in our culture, and also what people believe is the solution, which is ignoring toxic pride. So people, it's like a double-edged sword, right? They want to believe that punishment is the solution to their problem. Yet punishment itself is the problem. So ignoring is our society's favorite thing to do when communication is so critical. So I'll bring up 3 things that I flagged this week. Either that I see, I only use my social media for posting things related to mental health. I really don't use it personally anymore, only because when I did, there's some truth to a lot of the things that have been discussed on like documentaries like Social Dilemma. It just complicates people's personal lives. So I block a whole bunch of people that are misusing that information for personal reasons. And I strictly keep it to, this is my story. If you relate to it, great. This is the information I have to share. This is my experience. If people are concerned about their image more than they're concerned about relationships, then that's a little bit of a problem for me personally and in general. We should be able to share and communicate things openly without being concerned about our image. People who are concerned about their image, it's rooted in trauma and shame and more narcissistic tendencies. So why are boundaries so important? I saw something that I flagged. It was a response to something an author had written about boundaries. And this is where things get very confusing in our society. All these, and it's rooted in social conditioning. All these statements confuse people because they're rooted in this should. I should be a nice person. I should be a compassionate person. I should be kind. I should live the golden rule. And it was interesting because somebody just brought this up this morning. And this person said they had been depressed. Anytime a person tells me that they've been depressed, I know that there's some anger underneath that they haven't expressed. Either because they haven't been allowed to, or it hasn't been safe, or they haven't built up enough confidence to express that anger and withstand the gaslighting that comes with that. So depression is always hidden anger that hasn't been expressed. So it's important to know that. So when you're struggling with any form of depression, it hasn't been processed. Some kind of grief, some kind of anger. So it's important at that point in time to get some support to at least be able to express that. Okay? So she said, I think I'm angry because I have tried to be a person of integrity, okay? So she says, I think I'm angry because I try to be a person of integrity. And I have tried to live by these rules, right? These rules of like the golden rule, or be compassionate, or be kind. She said, and then I run into a whole bunch of people in my life who I am mindful towards, and they are hateful to me. So it's like I'm mindful to them and treat them like they're human. They aren't mindful to me and they dehumanize me. And I said, yeah, that's definitely a reason to feel angry. And I said, so part of it is the social conditioning. You're falling into the, I have to be nice, I have to be kind, I have to be compassionate, I have to be, and it can be forced. Sometimes it's forced. And then you're met with people who aren't mindful of you. So then you ask yourself why you're doing it. Are you doing it because you really want to do it? Or are you doing it because you're hoping the other person will meet you with the same compassion? Most of us, because we're wired to belong, we're hoping people will meet us with the same compassion. People who are empaths, they tend to be more mindful and they tend to be more humanizing. It is hard to deal with people who don't see you as a human being and they dehumanize you, and you're trying to have compassion or you're trying to be kind and they overtly disregard you. I'm sure we've all had those experiences. And it leads me to the topic of this ignoring. So because ignoring and not communicating is so prevalent in our culture, and I've thought about this. I was a teacher for a long time. I was a school counselor, have my own kids. Of course, I was a kid and being raised in a very toxic culture. Everybody has trauma for the most part, because parenting and the go-to in schools is to ignore, which is a function of behavior. So we want to correct behavior with another function of behavior, which doesn't make sense. So there's 3 functions of behavior. So there's avoidance, power and control, and attention. So avoidance is basically ignoring. And then people want to combat one behavior with another behavior that's a function of said behavior. So let's say someone's wanting attention, we want to combat it with avoidance. It doesn't work. You can't eradicate one function of behavior with another function of behavior. It's only through understanding that you're going to hopefully identify the behavior and change the behavior. So this whole ignoring thing is a tool. And it's a tool for a lot of things. Most people, because they're busy, they'll be like, oh, just ignore that. Just ignore that. Don't respond to that person. Ignore the narcissist who is bothering you and isn't being mindful of you. Ignore all the things that are going on in our society. Ignore someone who doesn't do what you want them to do. So there's a lot of ways in which people use ignoring. So when I was a teacher and a school counselor, let's say I walked by a classroom, right? And there's a kid rolling around on the floor. You would hear the teacher saying, everybody ignore them. And then the child's behavior just gets worse. And it gets worse because ignoring doesn't work. Ignoring as a form of punishment, like when kids are little and they're like, you need to go to the corner, or banishing people, or when this happens a lot in families so that they can align. Let's say it's innocent. Let's say it's completely innocent. I've had this experience. It's not even rooted in a belief system like I have now. But at one time I was so busy because I had gotten divorced. I was a single parent. I was trying to finish college. I had gotten remarried. I was trying to work through some stuff, and I didn't go to like some funeral. And instead of communicating and asking people why that happened, they did the punishing thing. We're going to ignore Jennifer. We're going to punish Jennifer. She's not participating in our family stuff, right? And then they do that ignore thing, and it never gets resolved. So it's that their function of behavior is power and control. I want to have power over you. You're not doing what I want you to do. And so a lot of times, because we're wired for connection, people don't want to feel that rejection, so they will give in to other people and avoid their own self-care, avoid their own goals, because they want to go meet the needs of other people who will use ignoring and rejection as a tool. And because it is so deeply rooted in our subconscious mind as a punishment from childhood, then people will often submit to another person because they know that they're going to be ignored or banished. So it's about being able to withstand that. So going back to the classroom situation, you ignore a student and they're going to increase that behavior, particularly if the function of their behavior is for attention. If they're attempting to get attention and you ignore them, then the need that they have just gets heightened. We have to be able to have conversations. So telling everybody, ignore them, isn't helpful. So the way I used to deal with that as a teacher is I would say, okay, you're rolling around on the floor. You're not participating. Clearly, I can't make you participate. We can't make anybody do anything. We're not going to ignore you because it's really hard to ignore someone rolling around on the floor when the rest of us are trying to work. It's not practical. So I give people choices. I'm like, you can either talk to me when everybody starts to do their work, or during recess if you want more privacy, or you can decide to join us as a team, as a human team, because what we don't want to do is banish people from their human counterparts. You want to involve them and integrate them in some way and say, no, you're a part of what we're doing. Now you're choosing to remove yourself from what we're doing, but you are a part of what we're doing. And by choosing not to be a part of what we're doing, you're creating complications, and we need you to be a part of what we're doing. So let's talk about why you're doing this and how we can support you to do something different. So it really requires communication, which a lot of people don't like to do. People really fear communication. They would rather avoid it, hoping that a problem solves itself. And they're really truly hoping in their mind, if I punish you, you're going to come to the next family function. But that's not how humans work. They end up not coming if they have any self-worth at all. And also because it's awkward and uncomfortable. And no one ever talked about anything. And they may not even make it safe for you to talk. They may try to talk over you or shame you for their belief system that you should be somewhere that they prioritize. And it's like, well, if you prioritize that, you be there. That's totally fine for you to be there. Yeah. That doesn't mean that I'm prioritizing that right now. And just because we have different priorities doesn't mean that we can't coexist. We can have different priorities. I can have studying as a priority, and you can have going to family functions as a priority, and we can still coexist. But instead, we create all these toxic family dynamics by saying, don't talk to me, don't text me, stop, don't whatever, don't share that. And it's like, okay, you're not going to get anything
or they
resolved.
block you.
Yeah, and then later, when there's no relationship, then they're wondering what happened. Why isn't there a relationship? Well, there was never any communication. Communication is the main ingredient for any relationship. Ignoring is not an ingredient to a healthy relationship. Not with your child, not with your partner, not with someone at work, not with anybody. But that's usually where people find their comfort, is I'm going to ignore it, hoping it goes away, or I'm going to ignore someone to punish them. There's two reasons why people ignore. I'm going to ignore hoping it goes away, or I'm going to ignore to punish somebody. But we have to tell people how we really feel. And sometimes people won't hear it. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was working with this lady doing some healing work, and it was going really well at first. And then I started to notice, like, her prices were pretty high. And she was always creating new things to heal after she would ask a bunch of questions. And she would say, well, it's only going to be this amount of money, using the word only. So I finally started telling her, like, I already spent the amount of money that I'm going to spend. I paid you. I can't do any more at this point. Oh, well, let's try to find a way. Let's see how we can brainstorm together to find a way. And I'm like, okay, she didn't hear what I said. I have a choice at this point. I can ignore her, which isn't going to be effective, or I can tell her again. So then, of course, a couple days later, she came up with a new thing and was like, no, we really gotta address this. This is really important. You know, I know those other things are important. I'm like my bills? Yeah, my bills are important. I don't want to get behind on my bills. But it'll all work out. You just need to address this first. And I said, again, I don't have the extra money anymore. We already did this. So she did this for a while. And I never ignored her. I kept responding to her. Finally, it entered my mind. I'm like, okay, this is what everybody else does. They ignore. So I finally sent her an email and said, hey, listen, we already did the work we were going to do. You make up new things, and sometimes you say it's about my kids or some things that get me concerned, and then I want to address it. But the truth is I don't have any more money, and I can't do this work at this time. I will contact you if I need something from you. And she didn't respond at all after texting every single day. And so that tells me that it was probably more about money than it was about addressing my issues that she's concerned about. Because when people come to me, if they say I can't afford it right now, I say, okay, I'll keep your file. And when you feel like you want to return, just call me back. And if something comes up in between time and you just want to run a question by me, contact me. I do respond, though. I don't just... So she didn't respond to that, which I thought was telling. So that's all rooted in some poor communication skills. And it's a red flag for me. So I don't really see it as having wasted the money, even though at some points in time I have seen it that way. I see it as, okay, this was something that I needed to experience to maybe identify boundaries that I need to set, or work on my communication, or be clear with my communication. Just because we're clear with our communication doesn't mean another person will hear us if they have an agenda. And I have a blog, beneficial people versus people who have an agenda. So type A people are agenda people, type B people are beneficial. They don't have an agenda, but a lot of people do have an agenda. And when you don't adhere to their agenda, then they ignore you. So her agenda was to get more money from me, basically. When I told her I didn't have any more money to spend, then she ignored me. And so I look at what that can teach me, and that I won't be utilizing that particular service in the future if people operate that way, because I don't see that as the highest timeline of integrity. So boundaries, communication, those are key ingredients. So when people tell me that boundaries aren't part of the spiritual journey or whatever, I'm like, no, absolutely they are. Absolutely they are. Boundaries are the road to self-love, and so is communication. Ignoring creates so many complications, ignoring and avoiding. In fact, I say If you want to have a life of chaos, ignore and avoid things. That's the biggest contributor to chaos, is ignoring and avoiding things. So you're not running away from anything, you're just collecting more debris, so to speak. And it will catch up at some point. We have to face things, we have to communicate, we have to have boundaries. So basically I set a boundary with that person and said, I don't have any more money, I will call you if I need something. I'm not going to call her. But just based on how things were handled. But that boundary needed to be there. Otherwise, she would have kept convincing me that more and more and more things needed to be done. And I would be out of money and not able to pay my bills. And then who's that going to affect? That's only going to affect my stress level. So we have to have boundaries. So a lot of these things that people say can be problematic. You know, this, what would Jesus do? Golden rule, be nice. A lot of those things can be exploited by certain people. Because they're basically saying, well, you be nice to me, but I don't have to regard you or treat you with any human decency. You treat me like Jesus would treat me, but Jesus did speak up for things, so I don't know why people think that, or I don't know what they're referring to. Yeah, they say these things to gaslight people. It's really gaslighting. It's like, let me manipulate you to meet my agenda so that I can have power and control over you. If you don't do it, I'm going to ignore you. And if you set a boundary,
Get the reaction.
Yeah. And a lot of people, they will say things like ignore the narcissist. Or we tell kids, that kids will come up and they'll say that person's really picking on me and aligning people in the schoolyard not to like me. And then teachers are like, well, ignore them. Mm-hmm. Which basically you're saying go off and play by yourself.
Yeah.
And don't have any friends and just ignore it. It's really hard to do. It's kind of dehumanizing. It's like they don't want to deal with it, basically. So they're like throwing a quick solution at them. Like, well, just ignore them. Don't give them a reaction. And it's like, well, it's more complicated than that. It's easier said than done. It's hard to ignore people who are...
They keep doing it.
Yeah, who are either punishing you and rejecting you and making sure all your peers do it. Because, again, we're wired to belong. So if their peers are running away from them and they come and tell, and you just say, ignore that they're running away from you. No, that has to be processed. It's painful for that person that they're running away from them. And yes, the people with more narcissistic tendencies want a reaction. And if you tell them how you feel, certainly they're going to use it as a tool and probably do it more. But you definitely have to process it with somebody. Ignoring it isn't the answer. It might be like, okay, you can sit with me and talk to me about it. Or let's see if we can talk about it. Or find you other friends that aren't going to be so cruel to ignore you. So you can't combat ignoring with ignoring. It just doesn't work. So the highest timeline of integrity. So this is a question that has come up this week. This is something I dealt with as well. People who are in custody agreements or dealing with the courts, right? They often ask me, okay, they feel like they're tangled in a web, for starters. And you are tangled in a web. And even reflecting on my own situation, sometimes it takes years to get all the pieces and you react to things later because more pieces come to light and you're like, wow, was I really being treated that way? Was I really the recipient of this? I didn't have all the pieces and I didn't know what was going on, right? And so I tell people you can only control yourself. So be mindful of what you're doing. So whether it's a situation, I'll go into my own little history. So I was a teen mom. I had a baby when I just turned 18. And my mom had her issues, so she was trying to take her. And my ex-husband was older than me. He was like 24. And he was just doing his own thing, basically. We weren't married at that time. And then I had another baby a year later, so I had 2 kids as a teenager. And it was pretty chaotic. It was a web, basically. And I stayed married to him for about 6 years. And then I asked him to leave because I wanted to go to school. I wanted to do other things, and he was just chaotic for me. And he didn't want to leave. And so I had custody paperwork and all of that drawn up, and he literally threw it in the trash on the way out of the. Yeah, he just did not wanted to punish, and he basically said that I'm going to make your life miserable. I think those are like some words, some of the only words he's held to in his life. And so he would not adhere to that agreement. He did whatever he wanted. So if I sent it, he ended up moving back to LA. So if I sent the kids there, he would not adhere to like return dates, would do what he wanted to do. So most people, again, it's like fighting fire with fire, right? It's like, okay, what do I do in this situation? And I see this a lot with my clients. They're like, well, the other person's not adhering to this. Nobody's making them. The courts are too busy. And nobody has money to keep going back and drafting new custody agreements and new custody agreements. So I have thought a lot about this. And this was my rationale as my kids were growing up, because then I got remarried and had 2 more kids. So I said, you know what? I can only control myself. I am not going to use my kids as a tool because I'm not angry. I mean, I was done with the relationship. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't a healthy relationship. I knew what I wanted. I decided to move on. He apparently was angry and decided to stay angry and was going to use punishment again as a tool and ignoring. And that can be frustrating because then you can't, again, reach a resolution because somebody's not communicating. They're just punishing you. And so I would still send the kids. He didn't pay his child support. There was a statement in the court document that said whether or not he pays his child support due to parental alienation, he still has a right to see them, which is fine. I mean, I do think kids should see both parents, but he didn't really pay. He paid once in a while, like $100 or whatever, but he really didn't overall. He was very stubborn with information, like wouldn't tell us where he lived, played all these games. It was a lot of games. When it was time to return him, he would ignore phone calls, just made things very, very difficult. So I just decided that I was going to be on the highest timeline of integrity. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to use the kids as a tool. I'm still going to take them. I'm still going to keep going to school and doing what I need to do. And I'm going to keep this court document, and I always have. I still have it. I'm going to follow it because I can control what I do. So I would look at the dates, and if it said every other holiday or whatever, I would adhere to that. And now that they've gotten older, you know, when they start questioning things, then I can say, I have a court document. I followed it. I don't know what happened on the other end. But it became frustrating. And for a long time, I didn't talk about it. I just let that resentment build. And then I finally started talking about it, which then makes me look. And narcissists love that because they're thinking about you, but they love to think that you're thinking about them. And it's like, no, I'm actually trying to get out of this tangled web that you have kept me in for a long time by playing games and telling your family all sorts of things and playing the victim. That's another topic, the victim thing, and I'll get into that. So I just decided I'm going to have integrity. I'm going to follow the document. I'm going to adhere to the document. I'm going to save the document. And when there comes a day when they ask me, then I will say, this was the document and I followed the law. And the other person chose not to. And you can address that with the other person if it bothers you. Or you can blame me. I mean, you know, It's like that I did what I needed to do that was law abiding. So that's what I tell my clients. I say, get a court document, follow the court document. If the other person wants to play games, let them play games. It doesn't mean you have to play games with them. Just make sure that you're on the highest timeline of integrity. And then they might tell you something like, oh, you think you're so good or you're so this. And it's like, no, I'm not trying to be better than you. I'm just trying to make this as black and white as possible. Now, if the higher timeline of integrity appears better, then yeah, it's a better timeline to be on than to be deceitful or ignoring or playing games. I mean, that's not necessary. So I'll end with this whole thing about being a victim, okay? This is a word that comes up a lot now in spiritual talk or language, or, you don't want to be a victim. Don't act like a victim. So the truth is that there are casualties. And I like that word better. There are casualties to people's actions because there's a law in the universe, which is what people refer to as karma, that every action has a reaction. So there's a cause and effect. So if I don't pay my bill, then that has a consequence, right? If I don't show up to work, that has a consequence. It's going to affect other people and make them a casualty of my decision. Now, does that make them a victim? You can use that word, but really it's a casualty of someone's decision. And if somebody is ignoring and playing a game, yes, there's going to be a casualty. Like in my situation, my kids were the casualty to that decision of him not wanting to follow the court document to punish me and use the kids. And then when I bring it to everyone's attention, then they don't like it because it's too confusing. It's too hard to believe that someone that they allegedly loves them would do that. But he did do that. And they were a casualty, and I was a casualty. And then when you start to speak up, they don't like it, and then they play victim. This is where victim comes in. Then they play victim. Because in their mind, they've always been a victim since they were a child, but everybody was. Everybody has been a casualty, not a victim. And so they want to stay in that place. So what I tell people is, if you're moving forward and you're reaching your goals and you're doing what you need to do in life, you're not a victim. You may be a casualty of people trying to pull on you and keep you down. If you choose to remain stuck and you don't move forward and you blame other people, then that's a victim mentality. Like, I moved forward. I got the degrees I wanted to get. I got remarried. I had other kids. I did what I needed to do. So I don't see myself as a victim. But I do see myself as a casualty to someone's poor choices. But I'm not going to let that hold me back. But I see people make a lot of excuses. They're like, I didn't get to do this because I had to have this baby. I didn't get to do this because I was in this marriage. Well, if you choose to stay in that marriage, then that's a choice. If you choose to blame somebody else for your circumstances, that's a victim mentality. If you choose to address the fact that you were a casualty in someone else's choice based on cause and effect, that's not a victim. That's you being a casualty to somebody else's, typically, victim mentality, because they want to blame you, they want to project it onto you and say it's all your fault. He still does that. I can't go visit, and I see this a lot as a counselor. I'll give you an example of something that happened recently. So I work a lot with custody and kids and adults. So let's say I have a kid. I do. I have a kid that I work with, okay? And we're doing, like, the parent decides to move. They're the ones that choose to move. No one makes them move to another state. If you have a kid and you choose to move to another state, you're the one that's making that difficult. And you're the one that has to deal with that. And so they choose to move to a different state, just like my ex-husband does, and then they want you to accommodate them and baby them. And it's like, no, that's your choice. That's your stuff. So I'll have parents that move, and then they like to pretty much bother. They send me 1 million emails. I want to know about my child's counseling. I want to know about this. I want to know about this, demanding it. And I'm like, okay, well then, this is the time of your child's counseling. So go ahead and mosey your little self over here, because if they're under 14, you can be a part. So go ahead and come and be a part. Deadwood. You don't even hear one response. Because they don't want to come. Because they don't want to make the effort. The only time I'll get a response is like after they've thought of an excuse. Like 2 weeks down the road. They'll wait and wait and wait, and then they'll be like, I can't because their mom lives there and she makes things difficult. And I'm like, okay, well, I have a solution to that. I'll go ahead and ask the mom to have someone else drop them off, and you won't even have to see the mom, and you can take part in counseling. And then they'll just come up with another excuse. And so they'll do this thing where I'll say, okay, well, let's set up like some FaceTime visits, Thursday or Wednesday or whatever at this time. And then they'll literally send me an email with them trying to get on the computer. And then they'll be like, I was trying to get on the computer and the mom or dad didn't let me. And then the parent responds and they're like, yeah, I had the computer on. And they'll do this several times. And so what I do with that is I send an email and I say, okay, well, thank you for trying to adhere to this visitation agreement. Sounds like the parent isn't ignoring you and is saying that they had the computer on. If that didn't work, then let's try again this week. But also a reminder that you can come to counseling on whatever day and time if you want to meet with your child and know what's going on. No response. Because you're offering solutions. True victims don't like solutions because they want to stay in that victim mentality. So if they don't like until you hit the solution they want, which is give them everything they want, that's the solution they want, then you're not going to get anywhere with them. My mother-in-law is the very same way. She wants to have complete control over everything. So with my girls, who are my 2 younger kids, she would wait till my husband went out of town, I guess, and then she would just text him, going to pick up the girls, and never tell me. So then I'd go to the school, they wouldn't be there. And I'd ask the secretary, and then, of course, she'd be all nice to the secretary, and they'd be like, oh, their grandma came to pick them up. And I'm like, okay, well, I didn't know that. And I left work to come and get them, which I'm a casualty now of someone else's choice not to communicate. So then I would send her a text, and she would ignore me, do the ignore thing, because it didn't play into the narrative she wants. So hours would go by, and then my husband would be in some remote site with his job, so I didn't know if he knew. So I would just text her and text her and text her. She'd ignore me. So finally I took her name off the list at the school and told them, I don't care how nice she appears, you're not allowed to pick them up. So she didn't like that. And she does this thing where she's like, well, I told Gilbert, if he doesn't talk to you, that's not my problem. And I'm like, okay, well, I need you to tell me. No, I don't want to. I want to ignore you. Because she knew she could get her way. These are the little games people play. There's a book that was written in the 60s, the games people play. So then I started saying, okay, you know what? If you want to attend something, then you need to text both of us, and we'll talk about it, and we'll let you know. No, she just insists on just texting him. So I just stopped associating altogether. I'm like, this is your deal. This is your game. I used to text her for birthdays and say, oh, we're having a birthday dinner or whatever. She wouldn't respond to me, only if she got it from her son, not from me. So I'm like, okay, well then don't come. I mean, but you don't change the boundary. Because what they do is they hope that you'll weaken the boundary for them. And if they ignore you long enough, that you're going to give in. And it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not what we're going to do. And they rely on a guilt wound. That you're going to feel guilty because they'll start doing their whatever thing that they, you're going to feel guilty when this, you're going to feel guilty when that. I don't know. People play all these games, and it's like, just communicate. We can easily solve this problem. There's a solution. The solution is communicate with me. Oh, well, and then they'll accuse you of doing what they do. Oh, well, you just ignore me. No. You do that. I respond to everything. I literally respond to everything and everyone. Even if I hate someone, I still respond to them. I absolutely respond to everybody. And I just tell them, no, I'm not going to do that. Or no, I don't like this thing that you do. So no, I'm not going. Because I don't want to play those games. So I do respond to people. But when they want to stay in that victim mentality, they have to find a narrative that supports that. And if you give them a solution, then they disappear or they try to find a way around the solution so they can still stay a victim. Oh, well, Jennifer's so mean to me and doesn't let me see the girls. Oh, okay, well, I sent you this text to come to the birthday dinner and you chose not to come. So that's your choice. Oh, I blocked you. Okay, that's your choice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's all your choice. That's all your, there's a natural consequence to those choices. And I'm not going to be a casualty to your games.
Yeah.
So there's casualties and there's victims. There are many, 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 many casualties in this world. There are people who play the victim. And they're usually responsible for having so many casualties. And then when you offer them a solution, they don't like it because they know darn well it's a solution. They're just basically don't want to say that's not the solution I want because they know they're going to sound like a 3-year-old. If you say, okay, well, what solution do you want? I want you to do everything I say. Oh, okay. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. That I'm going to just sit around and do everything you say. I have other things to do. Yeah, they're not going to say, I want to have complete control over you. I want you to come to every family function when I say. I want to pick up the kids when I want. I want you to do this when I say and that when I say. And it's like, no. If we don't communicate and find a way to respect one another, then I'm not participating. Because I don't want to continue to be a casualty in your game. So is this helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any questions?